Epilogue. Friday noon. 3 days. All Doreen had wanted was 3 days of peace and quiet. At least, that's what she thought she wanted. But by noon on day 2, she was bored out of her mind. She sat on her small deck with a cup of coffee in her hand, but her foot kept tapping the floorboards. Finally, she jumped up. "This is ridiculous," she announced to Muggs, who was sprawled out in the sunshine beside her. "We have to get some work done. It's either that or I'll go stir crazy." She bounded off the deck steps, wondering where her now full energy level had come from. Yesterday, she'd been dragging her sorry butt around the kitchen and trying hard to put all the pieces in her head into place. But now she was full of energy and ready to go. She grabbed the shovel and headed to the garden to start on the next bed. She kept looking back at the markers that were still in her lawn to show where the expanded deck was supposed to go. She hadn't done anything further because, of course, it would be not just her working. It would also require Mac. Was a project this size doable on a weekend or several weekends? Today was Friday, and normally she would be gardening at Millicent's, but Millicent had again asked Doreen to come on a Saturday instead. After weeks of working on Mac's mother's yard, Millicent's garden was looking decent. So, unless Millicent or Mac had anything extra they needed Doreen to do, it would probably just be 2 hours tops of weeding to keep the gardens in perfect shape. And Doreen didn't really want to drop her income, but she also didn't feel good about taking money for 3 hours if she was only putting in 2. With her first kick onto the shovel, digging into her own backyard, she could feel that same satisfaction rolling through her. She loved working her own land. She loved working on this place. As she moved closer to the house, she looked down at Muggs to see he had not moved. "You're just being lazy." Muggs opened his eyes but didn't budge. She looked to see Goliath sprawled on the grass behind her, his tail twitching. "Well, at least you're here beside me," she said. She bent down, lifted a clump of weeds, gave it a good shake, tossed it off to one side to create a new pile, and kept working as she headed down the right side of her property. Then she realized she had seen no recent sign of Thaddeus. She turned and looked around. "Thaddeus? Thaddeus, where are you?" There was a flutter of wings and Thaddeus muttered, "Thaddeus is here. Thaddeus is here." She spun around to see him waddling toward her from the creek. "You know you're not supposed to go to the creek on your own," she scolded him. "Not with it rising like it has been." He just squawked and gave a full-winged feather ruffle. She laughed. "Like you care what I say." Looking closely then, she caught a glint of something in front of him on the ground. "What did you find?" She stabbed her shovel into the dirt and headed toward him. But instead of being cooperative, he picked up the small object and bounced backward. No, Thaddeus, we're not making a game out of this." But Thaddeus wasn't listening. He was too enthralled with whatever it was he'd found. She glared at him, knowing the more she chased him, the more he would back up or fly away. Goliath walked to her side, studying Thaddeus with great interest. "You're not allowed to go after him," Doreen snapped at Goliath. He just gave her a slow-eyed look, as if to say, "Seriously?" At that, Thaddeus stopped and stared at both of them. "Thaddeus, come here," Doreen said, and she crouched in front of him. Thaddeus started to back away, and Goliath crouched down low, as if to pounce. She put a hand on top of Goliath's back and neck and said, "We don't do that to friends." He made a weird chittering sound, and she tapped him gently on the nose. "Goliath, behave yourself." Thaddeus hopped forward, as if willing to give her whatever was in his beak. It was metal and small. She didn't understand, but it looked like a label. "That's cool, Thaddeus," she said as she held out a hand. He looked at her, cocked his head to the side, and then dropped it. Doreen snatched it up before he could change his mind. She looked at it, noting the little indents. It was like a little nameplate or something for a tool. "I don't have a clue what it means, but thank you." She popped it into her pocket, got back up, and returned to her digging. Only Thaddeus wasn't happy with that. He squawked at her, "Thaddeus! Thaddeus! What's the matter, Thaddeus?" He hopped away a few steps. She frowned, dug the shovel deep into the ground again, and took another few steps toward him. Immediately, he hopped back toward the creek. "Oh, that's not good," she said. "Please tell me that you didn't find any more bodies." He just turned, gave her that gimlet eye, and kept going. She walked around to the end of the path, where the creek flowed but the water level was much lower. She stared at the creek water, absolutely loving the trickling sounds. She asked, "So what were you looking at?" Thaddeus hopped over, but he still looked like he wanted her to follow. With her heart sinking, she walked toward the little bridge as Thaddeus hopped across the wooden slats. "Thaddeus, careful, we never fixed that side." He called back, "Thaddeus is fine. Thaddeus is fine." She laughed, and with Goliath's and finally Muggs's attention, she carefully made her way across the bridge. "We'll have to get Mac to give us a hand with this," she said. "I know it's city property, but surely they wouldn't mind if we fixed the broken boards." As she was the one who had gone through the wood, she would at least like to stop herself from falling through a second time. On the other side of the creek, Thaddeus headed toward the lake. "Thaddeus, that's not good," she said. "I don't want to take a walk now." But he only went a little farther, and then he stopped. She came up behind him and saw a second glint. And there was another little nameplate. She frowned, bent down, picked it up, and studied it. She then pulled the first one from her pocket and said, "Weird. They are the same." One was slightly bigger though. Thaddeus hopped onto her foot. She reached down, placed her palms so he could hop on them, and then lifted the bird to let him glide up to her shoulder. Once he was settled there, he crooned gently and rubbed his beak against her cheek. "Thank you for these shiny gifts," she murmured, chuckling as she gently stroked his feathers. She studied the nameplates curiously. What are these, and what the devil do they have to do with us? Of course she knew. Likely they had something to do with a new case, whether she was ready or not.